much. Very happy to be here today. Thank you for coming. I will say a few words of introduction. But let me quote Financial Times. Just a few weeks ago, Financial Times suggested that Donald Trump is unlikely to win a Nobel Peace Prize, but he should be a contender for the Charlemagne Prize. Charlemagne, which is an awarded each year to the person who has made the greatest contribution to European unity. This analysis by Gideon Rachman, published in March, was titled "Trump is Making Europe Great Again." History will certainly record that a single speech by J.D. Vance in Munich, American vice president, helped trigger a paradigm shift in Germany, budgetary policy, nearly a revolution, a constitutional change to allow debt-funded defense spending, and a 500 billion infrastructure fund. All that passed in just a few days. This created a real momentum across European capitals, sparking hopes of a revived German engine. Stock markets riled, the DAX rose, but the question, is it really built to last? In this panel, we'll explore the anticipated effects of this macroeconomic stimulus and reform. More broadly, I will ask, what lesson can Europe draw from Germany's turn? How can we reshape the European fiscal framework to strengthen the union? So, joining me today, Jérôme Creel, Associate Professor at ESCP and Director of Research, OFCE Sciences Po. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Holger Schmieding, Chief Economist at Berenberg Bank. Thank you for coming. Nacho Álvarez, Professor of Applied Economics at the Autonomous University of Madrid and former Secretary of State for Social Rights. Thank you for coming. And Christian Kastrop, President and CEO of the Global Solution Initiative, Professor of Public Finance at the Free University of Berlin and Fellow at the Hertie School, Berlin. Thank you for coming. So each of you prepared some presentation. Maybe I will start with you, Christian Kastrop, because you have an interesting biography for the topic for today. You built your career at the German Ministry of Finance between 1989 and 2015, where you served as Deputy Director General in charge of budget policy, European economic governance, and international affairs. As such, you are one of the father of the Schuldenbremse. Thank you for that. So my only question for you, for your introducing presentation, what remains of the Schuldenbremse, the debt brake, is now the right time to reform it, and how? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I take the risk, and I just looked into my personal calendar, and it's really a nice thing for today. So it's the same week, 30 years ago, when I had to go to that time federal State Secretary Horst Köhler, who called me and said, "Christian, I got problems with the Deutsche Bundesbank. We need to create a fiscal rule for Europe." So this was just 30 years on. I did a lot of other things, but it's haunting me every night. And I don't know whether if I could get rid of that project, I don't know, maybe I would say yes. On the other hand, it kept me busy, it kept me practitioner of fiscal rules, and so here we are now, 30 years later, and of course you see, I would also mention it with a word, I think there is a nice song, if you really want it, you can get it, And of course, what we now have seen is that the debt brake, of course, is not carved in stone, and it has never been carved in stone. And I would like to mention here, as for some of parts of the European rules and some for the German rules, I think the problem has never been so much the rule. The problem has been, and I fully agree with all the critics to the German rule. So you see, we designed it, but we never said we want to create a certain austerity policy. It is an initial effect, of course, when it comes to, say, the public economy, to the political economy in Germany. So I think you can play it hard and you can play it low. And you have seen right now at this time that it was already slashed immediately from the new coalition. And you see, backwards looking, of course, if the political economy in Germany, and say also related to the European issues, would have been a different one, I think the rule could have been adapted also in an earlier phase. And of course, this should have been done. That's no way out. Yeah? But you see, anything goes. You see the military expenses are completely out of the debt brake rule. There are specific possibilities to do a kind of an exception anyway. There is also the thing to do a kind of a generational breakthrough, which they took all the measures we originally built in, but for more than 25 to 30 years, the political economy would not allow that. And this is, I think, what I would make as the first point here. And let me say my private view, I'm very happy that this has happened, and maybe from this point now we can create maybe better rules or other more fitting rules which also take care of the completely different political and fiscal economy we right now face. And we have already discussed here at Landgut Stober for 3 days now.
Thank you. So you're still a proud father of your baby.
Naja, proud father is a bit far-fetched. So I stand to these things I have done, and I do not know. So I guess there is no control for long-range guns here in the room. So, but I'm happy to discuss it, and I am also one of and I have some people who know it. I'm also one of the greatest critics of how to execute this fiscal rule, of course. It's also true for some aspects of the European one.
Thank you. So I will ask jetzt Jérôme Creel. Bonjour. Well, we have the mess. So Germany is now facing the very same European debt constraint it once helped establish. France has long argued that sometimes types of spending, like defense, should be exempt from debt calculation. That's the model. Should we move toward a new European paradigm built around the concept of sovereignty?
Thank you for this small question. I'm very happy to be here and close to Christian, who is there for the father. I'm not the son, so I wish I could also answer your question having two different questions in mind, to which I try to give an answer. The first one is, I take for granted that there will be a large fiscal impetus in Germany. Christian knows much more about this. It's a large amount of money over a large time period. So let's take for granted that it will happen. The first question is, will it work? Because if the answer is yes, certainly it has an impact on pushing the lines and maybe changing the rules. The second question, I think, which is also important, is, will this fiscal stimulus in Germany spread to the other countries, and how? So I try to be brief. Will it work? As an academic, I've been working on fiscal issues for a while, and I must admit there have been many papers dedicated to the so-called fiscal multiplier effect, to by how much a fiscal impetus might impinge on growth or inflation. And there are 5 conditions under which a fiscal impetus might be working. So the question is, will Germany be satisfying this condition? The first one is, it is better to implement a fiscal stimulus when there is high economic certainty. with the large geopolitical uncertainty we are going through, maybe this condition for Germany is not these days met, and it is not met elsewhere, of course. Another point that has been made in the literature, this first point was made by Bianchi and Melosi in 2017. The other point is a fiscal stimulus will always prove better when the monetary policy does not react to higher economic growth and certainly higher inflation. This is called, in our jargon, fiscal dominance. It's better to make a fiscal stimulus when you are sure about the reaction of monetary policy. It will not counteract to limit the scope for the real effects of the fiscal policy. And I'm currently working on a paper. It's on US data, but it's giving encouraging results. It shows that a public investment shock usually has a positive real effect on the economy. But if you do this public investment shock at a time of an uncertainty as regards the policy reaction by monetary policy, the fiscal multiplier might go down. You need to be sure that there is coordination of the policy mix between the ECB in this euro area and the fiscal stimulus that will happen in Germany. The third condition is the business cycle. It's better to make a fiscal stimulus where you are in the downturn rather than an upturn. Maybe time is ripe with all the difficulties Germany has been facing to do it. Fourth condition, the absorptive capacity. We're talking about a very large fiscal stimulus spread over many years, but we have a recent experience with Next Generation EU, where Italy has had access to large amounts of funding, and Italy has had many difficulties to absorb this funding to actually do a fiscal stimulus, to actually use the funds in order to fit the objectives of Next Generation EU, mitigating climate change and digitalizing. So in the context of Germany, the question is, will there be sufficient concrete projects to fund? Will there be sufficient labor to produce these goods? Will there be sufficient commodities to also produce these goods? And of course, a condition is the reaction by the European Commission. If the European Commission considers that there can't be any exemption for Germany to do the type of fiscal stimulus it wishes to do on public investment, this will not happen. I go to the other questions, and I go quick. Imagine it happens, the fiscal stimulus, it happens, there is growth, there is a bit of inflation, the ECB doesn't react, it's perfect. Will it be good for Italy, Spain, France? Yes, certainly, via the trade spillovers, via the good news that Germany has decided to do something to improve its public infrastructures, to boost its economy. It will be good news for everyone. But there is an uncertainty as regards the reaction on financial markets. Some are arguing that if there is a fiscal stimulus in Germany, the spreads might be decreasing because the cost of debt of Germany might be increasing. That would be good news for a country like mine, France. But what if the German issuance of debt is considered as the issuance of a safe asset that rather than reducing the spread, increases the spread because everybody is willing to have this good debt that Germany will be having? So the impact on the other member states is not so sure. And the other question, and the last question, is, will it permit to get rid of the fiscal rules? If we let the Germans do this fiscal stimulus, be out of the fiscal rules, be out of Christian's rule as well, does it mean that the others will be allowed to do so? And the question is, should they? I unfortunately come from a country which has not proven a miracle in terms of the management of its public finances. So I've been working many years on trying to show that the fiscal multiplier effect was positive. But in the case of France today, we can't afford making a fiscal stimulus. We can't afford being out of the fiscal rule. We need to do something in terms of reducing our public deficit. It has gone adrift, public debt has gone adrift, which means how do we do that? We might be thinking public investment, it shouldn't be at the expense of public consumption. We shouldn't get rid of public consumption because public consumption is public services. We need to be sure that in France, public services improve their quality. We live on the illusion that in France, we have the best hospitals in the world. What we know is that maybe they're still the best, but they were better 10 or 20 years ago. We're declining in terms of the quality of public services, which means that I come to the conclusion by Serva, there is no taboo at taxing. I stop there.
Thank you very much. Holger Schmieding, so chief economist at Berenberg Bank, your take on Germany. Do you have good news for us? Is the stimulus going to work? How do you assess the macroeconomic impacts that German fiscal policy will have 2025, 26? And what is your forecast regarding its influence on the broader fiscal stance across the EU?
Thank you very much. First of all, let me emphasize one point. We Germans, I'm German, should really make humble pie one of our national dishes. Yeah, we've often been wrong in our policy advice to other countries and sometimes been wrong in our policies ourselves. Let me, before I get to your question, the answer brief is yes, of course, it will work. Because by chance, it will not be a one-off boost. Germany is slow. It will be staggered 1 year after the next and the next and the next. The fiscal boost goes up so that as a result, most of it actually goes into actual output rather than just into prices. First, however, a few comments on what are the German problems. China is a serious shock for us. But if we look at the shares in German goods exports from pre-pandemic 2019 to now, the Chinese share has gone down by 1.7 percentage points. The share of the US has gone up by 1.9 percentage points. And the share of East Central Europe, the 4 countries from Poland to Hungary, has gone up by 1.7 percentage points. We heard indeed intra-industry and inter-industry, it's a difference. And as to the problems in the car industry, they are serious, but we already alluded to it. If we assume, this is definitely not a forecast, yeah? Just make the theoretical exercise. How much would be missing in the German economy if the car industry loses 25%, yeah? This is exactly the rise in the projected share of defense spending in Germany if we aspire to meet the 3.5% target, which Germany is probably one of the very few countries west of Poland to actually meet it. So our challenges are serious, but we shouldn't focus just on the car industry. Historically, for Germany, it's the thing that sets Germany apart is typically the Mittelstand, the small and medium-sized enterprises, rather than having the car industry and the chemicals. So what the country needs is it needs policies that encourage the Mittelstand to invest to create jobs in the country, rather than to create jobs elsewhere. And there we are at, well, I'm a sort of pragmatic supply side, not just at demand, but to some extent also at supply issues. Now, Germany had, pre-pandemic, years of modest fiscal surpluses. Why? Not austerity. The key reason was the 33% rise in jobs in the country since 2006. Austerity? To give you the numbers, German public consumption rise 2024 relative to 2010. Germany 35%, UK 21%, Eurozone outside Germany 17%. German austerity for the last 15 years has largely been telling the rest of Europe, yeah, abide by the rules, but we grant ourselves more. And until recently, we could afford it because of our jobs machine humming, which, however, is no longer the case. Germany really needs a serious overhaul. Now, on the debt brake reform, the various elements, if we add them up and assume, okay, Germany goes to 3.5% of GDP defense, It uses the infrastructure fund, the federal states use their leeway, and we have a bit of reclassifying expenditure as defense, although it isn't quite defense. So what could happen is that this is an amount equivalent to 2.6% of German GDP that we could now are giving the government the permit to spend extra. That is serious. It will once again likely come in stages. My naive forecast is over the next 6-7 years, I expect an increase in equal increments. So after the debt brake reform, I raised my forecast for German growth for the next 6 years by 0.3 percentage points roughly, which is good. Now, the outlook for other countries in Europe and for the fiscal rules. I don't think we will ever get a majority to really change the fiscal rules dramatically. Yeah? There's no change in the European Treaty likely. What will, however, probably happen is a very pragmatic application of the fiscal rules, which Germany probably will not resist seriously. Why? Well, we should be eating a bit of humble pie. And B, now politics reigns supreme in Europe. Yeah? Our key issue with Italy is, do you support Kiev? Our key issue with Italy is not what's your fiscal deficit. So that means we'll be sort of looking the other way, yeah, if Brussels lets Italy or France or whomever get away with sort of seeming to not fully meet the fiscal rules. However, we have to be aware of one other issue. That is, remember the bond vigilantes. We may like them or not. I work in financial markets, so I sometimes see a rationale in these irrational people. They always overdo it and then underdo it. But they are lurking out there. We've seen them briefly coming up when Trump made something very funny on the opposite of Liberation Day. What's the day for that? Yeah, Destruction Day in early April. Debt levels globally are higher than they used to be. Also, we are heading for an environment where inflation will typically be 2.5% and not 0.5%. Ultimately, the expression of labor shortages across the globe. And that means your nominal financing costs will be higher in the future, which makes countries vulnerable. So, whereas in Europe, the enforcement of fiscal rules will not play a major role going forward, it does not mean that countries such as France and Italy could just go to free spending, but they have to be aware the bond vigilantes are there, and the European Central Bank would probably intervene only if they at least accept some fiscal correction in such an event.
Thank you very much. Maybe an additional question. You mentioned the Mittelstand. How do you see the effects of this push in defense industry and maybe the connected space industry? Is the Mittelstand able to respond to this demand, or do we need such amount of investment that they cannot support that? How do you see the effect on these two elements, the defense element, the security element, on this industry?
Thanks for bringing that up. That's absolutely a key point. The Mittelstand is very likely to respond to that, and we know of individual examples to doing that. And just as an aside, the place where I went to school, Osnabrück, was mentioned, where a car factory is. It's actually a defense factory, looking at the place much more than any Chinese to take that on. The Mittelstand can be part of the solution. Once again, the key question is whether the Mittelstand does that while creating jobs in here, in Germany, or whether the Mittelstand does that and still has the extra jobs, say, in other countries rather than Germany. Mittelstand is part of the solution. And, well, yeah, back to supply
chains. You mean in Eastern Europe?
Eastern Europe could be, and probably will be, one of the prime beneficiaries of what's going on in the world. Namely, we have actually, when it comes to European integration, we should not award any prize to Trump. It's Putin, and I would not, under any circumstances, give him anything that has the Labour prize. But it's him who is bringing us together much more than Trump. East Central Europe is the key potential beneficiary under one condition, that it does not go down the Hungarian route. In Hungary, you see for the last 5 years that crony capitalism kills an economy. Until about 5 years ago, Hungary and Poland developed roughly on the same trajectory. in brackets, on a trajectory on which Russia was actually until 2014 itself. Yeah? But over the last 5 years, Hungary has systematically decoupled from Poland to the downside, and we can only hope that Poland does not end up going down the Hungarian way, because with crony capitalism, you may be cheap, you may be whatever, but you won't get the inward investment from the private industry. You'll have to go begging to Beijing to get some inward investment.
Thank you very much. So our last panelist, Nacho Álvarez, thank you for being here and for your patience. You prepared slides on your experience with recent economics policy in Spain, which did very well. But let me ask you a question. How would you perceive Germany's shift on their rules? Maybe what's your expectation from Berlin?
It's working? Yes. Thank you. Thank you for the question. It is difficult to me to talk about Germany and the case of Germany leaving austerity behind. I think we can answer the question better if we look what has happened in Spain. I think that Spain may be a good example of when discussing how to leave austerity behind in countries such as Germany or other European countries. And I would say it is very unusual for a generation to experience two major crises during a lifetime. And this is what has happened to us. And at least in the case of Spain, we have had the chance of doing it with radical different policy measures in between the Great Recession and the COVID crisis. So I think we can learn some lessons from that for the Spanish economic policy, but also probably for the case of other countries such as Germany when discussing on leaving austerity behind. If, as we already know, if we look at the measures taken during the Great Recession, we already know that the Great Recession was driven by basically two approaches, fiscal austerity and internal devaluation. Fiscal austerity was supposed to deliver financial stability and rapid GDP recovery. And internal devaluation was supposed to drive external competitiveness and also rapid recovery in Spain during the years 2010, 2011, and 12. But we didn't saw that. And compared to that experience, during the years of the pandemic, what we saw, it was a different approach. As we can see in the figures, we experienced a total public expenditure excluding interest increase by almost 20% during the last years in Spain, an increase even larger than the one experienced by Italy and Germany and France. And when in relation with the second policy driven by during the Great Recession, we saw back in that time the so-called internal devaluation. If you look at the figure on the right, you can see that real wages declined by almost 15%, 10% in the lowest deciles during that period. So compared to that policy, what we have seen in Spain during the last years is an expansionary fiscal policy, an important expansionary fiscal policy, but that's been a bit common around other European countries. In the case of Spain, the shift in economic policy has not just limited to fiscal policy, but it went further. We experienced also a pro-labor policy with an increase in the minimum wage of around 60% and a new labor reform, the first in the last 25, 30 years, that it was not based on deregulating labor market, but on a new regulation of the labor market, prohibiting certain temporary contracts and re-regulating again collective bargaining in order to allow for ultra activity or to move from company agreements to sectoral agreements. So when we look at the results of broad results of this economic policy during the last years, what we see is that comparing GDP growth on the left figure during the Great Recession and during the pandemic, we see that it took us almost 1 decade to achieve the GDP level that we have before the Great Recession, but it took us around 1.5 years to achieve GDP level that we have before the pandemic, with this change in economic and fiscal policy. And in terms of unemployment, the case was even more shocking, with one lost decade in terms of unemployment, but with the creation of 2 million jobs after the pandemic in the case of Spain. So increasing minimum wage was supposed to destroy our labor market, but it didn't. Spain created 2 million jobs. It transformed 1.5 million temporary jobs in 1.5 new permanent jobs. We had an increase in wages, particularly in real wages of the bottom 15% of the population. And today, Spanish growth outperforms the growth of the rest of the countries. So, why has this policy worked better? I would say that the point it is related, Servas, for example, have explained before, with demand. Expansionary fiscal policy, a pro-labor policy, increasing real wages, particularly real wages in the bottom, in the 15% bottom of the population, has acted as a driving force. It has increased demand from the public side of from the public sector, acting as a starter of the private sector to move the economy forward, but also taking into account that wages are not just a cost for corporations, but they are also the main source of demand for the economy. And therefore, and as some people here have studied, some Servas has studied using the Baduri and Magri models. What we have realized is that wage-led growth has been able to help the economy to grow and to move forward during the last years. Increase in wages might end up having the result of a decrease in corporate investment. But that was not the case in Spain, because it was rebalanced, taking into account the increase in private consumption and the whole demand. So what we see in the figure is that basically the strong performance of private consumption and the strong role of public consumption have accounted for around 2/3 of Spanish GDP growth during the last years, taking also into account the good performance of the external sector and particularly of exports and tourism. So just one final remark, one final comment when related to the unwanted side effects. Because many people might think, okay, this might work on the short term, but this might work at the expense of public finances. This might work at the expense of corporate sector profitability. So you're undermining corporate sector profitability with these rises in wages. You're undermining public finances with this strong expansionary fiscal policy. And what we have seen, at least in the case of Spain, is that this has not happened. What we have seen in the case of Spain, when we look at public deficit or public debt compared to GDP, is that we have been able to reduce public deficit during the last 4 or 5 years, even at a more rapid rhythm when compared to the fiscal cuts that we experienced during the 2010 and 2012. The fiscal cuts that we experienced during 2010, during the Great Recession, were able to reduce public deficit. Yes, they were able to reduce public deficit, but we have been able to reduce public deficit even more rapidly now with an expansionary fiscal policy due to economic growth and due to the ability of the increase in demand to reduce public deficit. And we have not done that at the expense of corporate profitability. economic growth is creating good opportunities for the private sector, good opportunities for the business sector. So I would say that on Keynes terms, the expansionary fiscal measures are basically paying for themselves at this moment. And you have to take into account that, of course, next generation funds, they have been very useful for countries such as Italy or Spain, but we are starting to implement those funds now in 2023, 2024. During the first years, those funds, they were not even absorbed for the economy. It was the own national budget that was paying for the recovery. So the main takeaway, I would say that in the case of Spain, we can see the intellectual revenge of post-Keynesian economics when dealing and when talking to Alberto Alexina, expansionary austerity. On a certain way, we have been able to prove that those measures were more efficient to overcome economic crisis and to promote GDP growth, at least on the situation that we were after the pandemic. Is that meaning that we have been able to overcome the neoliberal paradigm? I wouldn't say that. I would say that we are in a sort of interregnum in between the old paradigm and the new possible paradigm of economic policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe an additional question. Spain, I think, increased also manufacturing capacities. What was the driver of in the last 10 years? What was the driver of this expansion? What were the key points of this development?
Well, in the case of Spain, I would say that it is important to realize that the expansionary fiscal policy is not just being on public transfers, or it's not just being devoted just to public consumption, but it's been also invested in an important change in industrial policy. In Spain, for years, main policymakers used to say that the best industrial policy was the one that it just didn't exist, the one that it was decided by the free market. And that has been an important policy change in the last 4 or 5 years, with an important amount of expansionary fiscal policy devoted to a change in industrial policy. So I will say that we don't see clear results so far of that policy, but we start to see some improvements, some change from low value-added sectors to middle and high value-added sectors.
Thank you. Yeah, well, let's stick on our first question, a new fiscal age for Europe. It's a question. Maybe you, Christian Kastrop, when you consider this example of Spain and the example of next generation EU or defense funding, how can evolve the European fiscal framework? Can we evolve the European fiscal framework without abandoning macroeconomic discipline? Is it still an important word?
No, I really do think. Okay. There's a little thing, yeah. No, I think that's a very good question, how we go forward. And of course, my takeaway about my own history would not be that we say it's just all stupid. So I think we need reflecting also the political economy in Europe as such, as a whole, but also reflecting political economies in specific countries which have a kind of a leading role also in shaping the whole European output. I think this is important, and this reminds me of something we discussed, and this also with the French friends. I remember that in the Economic Policy Committee, when we were trying also to put something into the European rule, a kind of a, say, specific high productivity aspects. And I remember very well at that point in time the French coming to me and say, Christian, this is only decided by the French government and by the French parliament. Leave it out of any treaty, any contract. But I think it's still, that's of course fine and well taken, but I think nevertheless to have a kind of a trigger And this trigger may be for Europe as a whole or for specific countries in Europe to bring this in on high quality output and outcome. I think this is would be really also something we should look at in the future. So we cannot just say no to that. So how to do it, how individually doing it, giving it a European shape, I think we are on the way to it. So I think there are so many things we need to do. I think, of course, investing in, say, defense now, I think, of course, there may be, this is the US example, with defense you can also create additional value in other sectors of the economy. But, maybe it's not the best. We are not living in the best of all worlds, so we are not having the best possibilities not to invest just in defense, but also on really hardcore economic growth things as AI, as digital, climate change. There's so many things which would go first, but the times are changing and we don't have it. So I leave it with that. So let's have another look at these fiscal rules, make them really good in a way that this is for financing the future. Hope it's not too much defense, and I stop here.
Thank you. So, Jérôme, we had a German whatever it takes moment, and now what's about the discipline? Your take as a French economist, please.
Yes, thank you. So I wanted to maybe follow up on Christian's reply to your question, which is that yes, we may be looking forward to having the best fiscal policies and fiscal rules ever, but we can't forget that it took the European Commission and the European Council 4 years to achieve the new fiscal framework that has started just 1 year ago. And it's a bit weird to say to ourselves, okay, was nice to try, but it's not working at all, so we change everything. We need new fiscal rules. And we can't wait for the further 4 years. So what can we do? Do we go back to the first version of the reform, the one that was communicated upon by the European Commission? It should have been in 2020. Where or 2021, September, they had a first version of the fiscal rules, which was extraordinary because it was giving a bit more time to do austerity measures if they were needed. It was taking into consideration the possible structural reform that would be implemented, public investment that would be implemented, and it was a country-by-country self-assessment or assessment with the Commission. No numbers. We had the 3 and the 60%, but no safeguards. Then came the infamous non-paper by the Ministry of Finance in Germany that said, very good. It's very good version, but it misses a few points, like we should have been many safeguards. So we have the 3, we have the 60, we have the 1.5, we have the 0.3, the 0.6. I miss many of them. I'm not able to understand what's going on with the public finances in France. You may have known that it was not suspended, the procedure for excessive deficit in France. It's a term in English, I didn't know it, I've forgotten, which is it's on hold, okay. If you go this direction, it's correct. But in Paris, no one knows what is the impetus that we should be doing, except at DG Treasury, okay? Because they have the good files on Excel. They can push the good buttons. They know that if they do 0.1, that's correct. 0.2, not correct. Okay, so no one understands how it's working. Can we change it? Too late, too late. We need to see it work. If it is a disaster, we will have a reform. Our country will try to figure out how to manage with that. And there are countries with many ideas at reforming the rules, like the French. But as I said, we're not in a position to give advice, okay? We've had the worst public deficit ever in 2024 because we made many expectations that proved wrong entirely. We thought there would be a high elasticity of tax revenues because the last 2 years it was very high. It didn't happen. So we prepared a law of finance based on a very high elasticity of tax revenues to revenues. And we should have said, okay, we expect large tax revenues, therefore we might be using that in order to try to limit the deficit, therefore not increase spending in due proportion to the expectation that tax revenues will be high, which we did not. We increased too fast. Also public spending. In the end, we have had the public spending. We have had the snap election. Before the snap election, there were public measures to reduce public spending that, of course, were not being implemented, and the tax revenues have plummeted. And we shouldn't forget that many reforms have been made in France. So we are not in a position to advise on good fiscal rules. So I will not say a word.
But you have this experience, so should we rethink the frame or the old rules that obviously don't work?
Yeah, we should reframe it because it doesn't work. The Germans will go beyond the fiscal rules to make a fiscal impetus, and we go beyond the fiscal rules because we can't prove disciplined. So, okay, it doesn't work, but who gives the good management? It's very tricky these days politically. The thing that I think we miss is a higher layer of policy decisions on fiscal issues, like thinking clearly, calmly about the European fiscal capacity. We've had Next Generation EU. Maybe it's not working as well as we expected. There are absorptive capacities. In some countries, no real impact. In some other countries, certainly an impact. Nacho told us so. So we need to figure out how to do even better, because the Commission has been able to frame something that seemingly has been working with a European public debt that has not created sustainability issues. So maybe this is an avenue for research and for reform, going a step further, stick to the relatively not so good fiscal rules to achieve a bit of discipline, but in exchange for that, let's decide to invest collectively on health, on defense, on climate change mitigation, on digitalization. These are public goods. This is good for everyone. We might be funding it collectively, but this is another step, and this step has not been taken so far.
Okay. Our German voice here. How do you, yes, of course. How do you react to those two takes?
Oh, in terms of European fiscal capacity, I'm afraid I'll have to be the party pooper. Anybody who is here in Berlin politics, please correct me, but my impression is the appetite for another next-gen EU, anything big like that, is not very big in the German political sphere. To some extent, because the conservatives, and we are governed mostly by a conservative party, yeah, they really had to make...
Proved to change his mind.
Exactly, which had to make a absolutely belated U-turn, and then was forced by the prospective coalition partner to make a bigger U-turn than they ever contemplated, yeah? Now, sort of having breached the German red line, to also be accused by many of their core voters to also breach the European red line, yeah, don't expect too much, put it that way. What I can see in practical purposes, if there is a clear one-off issue, call it weapons for Ukraine, call it rebuilding for Ukraine, where you can say to the Constitutional Court, this is clearly limited and one-off, then the Constitutional Court will probably reluctantly accept it. But if it is a permanent European facility, I'm afraid the Constitutional Court will probably not accept it. And changing the German constitution so that the Constitutional Court would come to a different verdict is now politically almost impossible. So on a big European fiscal capacity, I'm afraid Germany will not really be able to endorse that. Doesn't mean, once again, that we cannot go along with either a bit of reworking or reinterpretation of the existing fiscal rules. One aspect, if I may add to the debate to the German thing. I was a fan. If you were one of the fathers of the debt brake, I was a fan of you initially. Then I just learned over time how it was applied. The education went wrong, as Mr. Weigel would partly have put it, and then came Putin. As to the education went wrong, I said that German public consumption has actually not been on an austerity path for a long time. Problem is German public investment has often been, as a share of GDP, 0.5 percentage points below the average of other Eurozone countries. So to have a deficit limit without making sure that what you really need, and by now it's not just infrastructure, it's also the military, gets enough funding, was in retrospect what turned out to be, well, wrong about the rule.
Nacho, your opinion about that. So more spending doesn't work every time. So the example of France shows sometimes it's going bad. So what's your point? Are you afraid of some difficulty for Spain to finance its debt in the next years?
Not for the case of Spain, clearly. We had today the same amount of public debt that we had before the pandemic because it's been rapidly reducing as a consequence of economic growth. But for sure, expansionary fiscal policy, I will say, it is not the only tool that we might use and the only tool we have and the tool that we all can use on the same way. It depends on the fiscal margin that you have. It depends on the economic situation. It depends on many circumstances. The point is that we just have not been using that tool for a long time. And it is time to open the debate of how can we use it on the best way. I would say that on the short term, the discussion on the Stability and Growth Pact reform, it is a bit tiring discussion. I mean, the first time we discussed this was back in 2005 when Germany and France were not achieving the Maastricht requirements. That was 20 years ago. I would say that opening again the debate of how can we legally amend changes on the recently approved Stability and Growth Pact is probably not going to be very useful. I will find it much more useful to discuss on the implementation and the application of the Stability and Growth Pact and how can we open exception clause, golden rules in the implementation of the pact. And I will say on not just a short term, but a more medium term, if we really want to achieve the proposals made by Draghi on the Draghi plan and really invest together, we need to find a way to make a stable mechanism of the issue of Eurobonds. Eurobonds were not feasible 10 years ago. They were not politically feasible 10 years ago. They have proven to be very useful during the pandemic. So we probably need a sort of Eurobonds, a stable mechanism of Eurobonds for the next year in order to cope with the tremendous important investments that we need within the Eurozone. And just a few days ago, Ángel Ubide and Olivier Blanchard made a very interesting proposal on this issue to have a viable Eurobonds mechanisms that does not entail transferring between countries and does not entail changes in EU treaties, and that might be feasible. And I would say that that's probably the best point to concentrate policy discussion at this moment if we really want to cope with the investments that we have ahead, not to lag behind the US or the Chinese economies.
Thank you very much. We have 9 minutes left. Maybe someone wants to ask a question in the audience. I see already someone or a reaction. We have a few minutes. And Shaheen, of course. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So it's also related to the first panel, and so I was really inspired to think about order, what this means by, what Adam Tooze talked about it. And actually, you can think about, if you bring in the systems view, you can think about there's certain order, there's self-organizing systems, some things that you see in nature, it's just perfect, and it's not really with rules and control and something else. So I think these are things we have to talk about and think about. Kind of, you know, what are so we need rules, we need goals and so on, but not in order to control reality and the future, but in order to co-create and shape it. And it's really related to what was discussed as well about the direction of change. So I think we need to understand that there's a direction of change. And so I really suggest that we bring in knowledge from other disciplines, in particular development psychology and also the wisdom traditions and what artists know. So there's a direction of change, and it's related to what Servas talked about, which would lead to, you know, ethics and common shared values of our humanity. And so once we know this, I think, and that kind of echoes what Servas was saying, lots of things are possible if we get reality right, because that's the thing. You know, we want to support life, and this is part of reality. If we get reality wrong, and then we try to do something, then, you know, we get into a mess. But if we get reality right, and I think this is something, I mean, it sounds really like very abstract, but I think this could be a good starting point, and there are insights out there, you know, from people who work on systems transformation, organizational transformations, using these insights. I think that could be really, really important.
Thank you very much. We'll take the question of Shaheen Valley.
Thank you. 3 very rapid points. One is that there is now obviously a conflict between German fiscal policy and European fiscal rules. There are 2 ways to solve that. Either Germany, in fact, reins back on its fiscal expansion, or Germany ends up advocating a change of European fiscal rules. So could you say what you think of that? Second, in the coalition agreement, there was a very important reference to an expert commission being appointed, potentially in the next few days, and to try and make a proposal for a permanent reform of the debt brake. What do you think should be that new ambitious permanent reform of the debt brake? And last, maybe a question to Holger in particular. You said that there is not a lot of enthusiasm in Berlin about a new NGEU. But is it possible for Europe to achieve what it wants to achieve insofar as defense, energy transition, without a new NGEU? And in particular, at the current moment, Germany is paying a disproportionately large share of the support to Ukraine. Without a common borrowing system, basically the rest of Europe is not contributing enough to Ukraine's support. So isn't it actually in Germany's interest to argue for a new NGEU so that everybody pays their fair share? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I will stop with this question because we have 5 minutes. I will let everyone exactly 1 minute 20 seconds to answer, and and so we can go. Thank you. So, Holger.
Okay. First of all, in a multipolar world of autocrats and would-be autocrats, I very much agree with Adam Tooze. We can hope for temporary deals between these autocrats, but not for anything like a lasting order. On the German issues, well, the European fiscal rules are flexible, and Germany will probably be able to claim that its policies will raise its GDP path, its trend growth so much that, of course, extra expenditures are justified, and then we'll see whether the EU Commission will really say you're absolutely wrong on that, or whether they kind of, as in many other cases, say, we're not sure, but if you promise to really implement all these pro-growth reforms, we'll let you get away with it. Expert commission on debt brake reform, what I would like to see is basically to see the infrastructure fund being made permanent, with certain conditions to control that this really goes into infrastructure, rather than is something, okay, we can also now spend more like on pensions and the like. On NGEU, new NGEU, once again, I think it's difficult to get there. What is easy is to allow everybody to redirect the current NGEU funds into whatever are our new priorities. And yes, that's an irony, because Germany is the only major country with fiscal space, and because Germany will not underwrite a huge amount of Eurobonds, Germany simply has to be the one country in Europe which pays for Ukraine, while the US winds down its own support. This is now the key issue for Germany. My proposal is Germany should immediately say there are 20 billion euros, German euros, for the Ukrainian defense industry. They are underutilized. We could afford it, yeah? Rather than this nice step-by-step approach. Yesterday, 1.9 billion extra was promised. This is where Germany would have the fiscal space. This is where Merz could make a difference, and which is something which even Putin might at least notice, yeah? Other countries in Europe don't have the fiscal space for it, and if Germany doesn't go for Eurobonds, which probably it won't, Germany pays for it.
Jérôme.
Thank you. So maybe replying to your very broad and nice question of thinking, rather than thinking about the numbers, the constraint, thinking about the change in the direction. Ironically, I would say that when countries are being given some exception to the means they can use to put in fiscal policy, it's for military spending. So I'm not sure it's really close to our thinking. And to me, it's very disappointing that because we have military issues, we can afford going beyond the rules, which I do not object. We have security problems, but we have many other problems. But we don't have a direction except on putting money on the military equipment. So that was my reply to you. And maybe to Shaheen, I'm very pessimistic about the ability of having this German impetus be consistent with the fiscal rules. I don't think it's in the German interest to not do it, but I don't think it is in the interest to go in the direction of moving the fiscal rules for those countries that seemingly do not have fiscal space. My last point being, fiscal space can change very rapidly if ever the ECB were also part of the discussion. We've seen a policy mix very effective during the different crises. The ECB has not gone bankrupt. The ECB has accompanied the rise in public debts. All the public debts that were being issued during COVID-19 crisis have been in the portfolio of the ECB. This is not an issue. So if we can't have a European fiscal capacity and we have needs to go in a given direction that the EU might be giving us, let's do it at the national level with some help by a new wave of quantitative easing. I'm sorry, the name is not nice to some ears, but let's do it again.
Christian.
Yeah. Okay, first to the question of the group. I think the group should really make a great revision of the fiscal rule. I think, of course, also they will also look at to what is existing, but I think they really should open up a little bit. They should be, say, thinking about what is a high quality of public finance and what also has the right macroeconomic impact. And this macroeconomic part, I think this is clearly underrated in the given rule. So it was really more focused on structural issues. So it should be open also to a macroeconomic view, but also, of course, to a high quality view. What about to finance, say, especially with the credits? On the broader side, I think we simply have to see. So I tend to agree with you, Jérôme, but I fully believe that finally, I think this, you say Germany has fiscal space. I think in the end, I think the threat we face from the West and of course from the East in a way, and we have discussed this here at Landgut Stober for 2 or 3 days, I think this will need also a common European response. So I think in the end, maybe the Germans will take another year or 1.5 years, but in the end, I believe it's unavoidable. This Germany, with his full fiscal force and also with his good stand in on say so on the fiscal side, I think they have to do more. And for me, this is also a very crucial trigger point of the whole new coalition, whether this flies. I think without a joint European thing, this defense issue, and also other global issues where Europe should stand behind, also given the discussion we had earlier this morning. I think there will be no way out. They have to learn it, and if they don't learn, I guess, yeah, the fiscal, the judicial system may be a role, Bundesverfassungsgericht may play a role there, I agree with Holger there, but I think I can only say we have to overcome that, and if we, then it goes the hard way.
Thank you. Nacho, the last word for you.
Yes, when dealing with the discussion of how to leave austerity behind, I would say that the experience in Spain has left at least two lessons. We have learned two things. First one is that sometimes, probably not always, not for all the countries, but sometimes fiscal space can be created. And that was for sure the case of Spain. Spain, 5 years ago, started to rise taxes on a progressive way. So after 5 years, taxes have risen of about 3 percentage points of GDP. We're closer today to the EU average in terms of public revenues to GDP. And that means that since some fiscal multipliers of taxes and expenses are different, you can have an expansionary fiscal policy, a balanced budget expansionary fiscal policy, using your new revenues coming from the rise of in taxes to spend on a wisely way. So you can sometimes create fiscal space. That was the case of Spain. Probably that's not the case of France or other European countries. So therefore you need other mechanisms, other ways, Eurobonds or similar tools. And the second thing that we have probably learned too is that you can use that to change the direction. Many times macro guys, they just care about expansionary fiscal policy, contractionary fiscal policy and the effect on public deficits, but we don't really think about how can we use that new spending. And using that new spending on the basis of a new industrial policy, it can be useful to develop new sectors and to start to change the direction. And that will be that on certain countries such as Spain, that's been a second thing that we have learned during the last years. So fiscal space sometimes can be created, new revenues can sometimes be used to change the direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you, for your takes and for your attention. Thomas.
Many thanks, Cecile, for this excellent panel and in time. Very new thing these days. I would just take a second because I found it quite interesting what you said, Nacho, and I mean, evident. We are in between these paradigms, and that's exactly what has happened in Germany. I mean, we have shifted slowly or in a bumpy way towards this paradigm shift, and now we are sort of in the midst, and we have advanced a lot. And I think the legal question is quite interesting because if you put it in the paradigmatic way, you know, there has been a lot of pragmatic progress in the past with all the academic work, Blanchard and others, and then it has already also been translated into the European rules, which you described perfectly. And then, you know, in these paradigm shifting times, there are always some old guys around who are trying to go against, and that was Christian Lindner. And another Christian, but not so helpful one, and Lars Feld, you know, and then, you know, but if you put it like this, you know, you are in the trajectory towards something which we find, I think, and a lot of evidence is the better world we're going to, less ruled fiscal policy, whatever. But it's going back and forth, and then to say now, and I understand the order liberals in Germany to say, the European rules suddenly are good. We should stick to the European rules and not to the new German rules. I mean, for reasonable people, that's not. I mean, even if yes, it's difficult to argue now to change the European rules again, but that's the reason. I mean, that's what you should do now, because whenever everything goes in that direction, you should also put them with you who are laggards. So that's just maybe a word which puts it again into our framing of paradigm shifts. Very good discussion. Thank you a lot. And another, you smell the next point on the agenda. There's lunch downstairs. We will get back at 2 o'clock, then have an excellent session on globalization, very interesting. If you pass, going down, there's one room, just if you have a minute, where videos are shown of videos of interviews that we did in the last 2 days with people who have been here. So you get an impression also of what has happened in the last 2 days. And there was a lot of things around downstairs also to look at, enjoy, and see you back in an hour. Thank you.